She didn't even wait for dessert. "I'm done," she said, folding her napkin like it was a legal document. Her tone had all the grace of a company executive handing out layoffs before a holiday. "I want a divorce." Her sisters immediately nodded, like synchronized backup singers. Her mother gave me that sad, condescending smile she always reserved for me, like I was some tired dog she regretted rescuing. And her father? He just sipped his scotch, as if it were a boardroom negotiation he'd already won. Even Greg, her brother-in-law, gave a half shrug, avoiding my eyes. Which was interesting, considering he still owed me $48,000 from a loan I co-signed to get them through a rough patch. I sat there and looked around the table at the people I'd spent 12 years pretending to get along with. People who never really wanted me here in the first place. Who saw me as convenient, stable, and utterly forgettable. Her youngest sister once joked that I was practically a tax deduction in human form. They laughed then. They were laughing now. Except this time, they thought I didn't hear the joke. I put my fork down, wiped my mouth, smiled like I'd just been complimented on my tie. "I completely understand," I said calmly. A small ripple of relief spread across the table. One of them even exhaled out loud, like they'd been bracing for a scene. Her mother muttered something about how it's better to do this civilly. Her father gave a slight nod, impressed I hadn't raised my voice. Marlene, the wife, soon-to-be ex, smiled the most smug little smirk I've ever seen, like she'd just closed a deal. But here's the part they didn't know. This house we were sitting in, the lakefront one they always bragged about during holidays, it wasn't hers. It wasn't even her father's anymore. Not really. Not since the day he quietly defaulted on the loan I'd arranged and secured 10 years ago. They had no idea. They thought I was the quiet one, the predictable one, the boring one. And to be fair, I had spent over a decade playing that role very well. Paid the bills on time, showed up to birthday dinners with a smile and a card, mowed the lawn when her father's back, went out conveniently every spring. And I listened while they made decisions, excluded me from conversations, treated me like some side character in their family sitcom. But there's something you learn when you're the man no one watches. You see everything. So I kept smiling. They talked logistics. She could keep the car. She wanted the condo. She assumed I'd be out by the weekend. I nodded. I sipped my water. I agreed with everything. It was beautiful, really. They thought they'd won a silent war I never admitted existed. But I wasn't silent because I was weak. I was silent because I was busy preparing. Watching, calculating. I drafted my first legal structure 3 months after our second anniversary, right after I'd bailed out her father's business under the guise of family loyalty. It was a clause tucked into a refinancing agreement so dull, so boring, that not even their accountant caught it. Because who questions the paperwork from the quiet husband? And now, 12 years later, she's sitting there in front of her whole support squad, telling me it's over, like she's announcing a promotion. That's when I felt it. Not anger, not sadness, freedom, not the cliché kind, the dangerous kind, because I knew something they didn't. This wasn't a breakup. It was an exit. And when you spend years being underestimated, there's nothing sweeter than flipping the switch they all assumed you didn't know existed. So yeah, I agreed. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even ask for another drink. I just looked at my watch. It was almost 9 p.m. And at 9:30, my attorney would be pulling a file from a safe deposit box. A file sealed with a clause none of them remembered. A clause that didn't just shift assets, it shifted power. They thought this was my ending. It was my entry. Oh, and if you're still listening, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. It's easy to miss when you're caught in a good story, but it genuinely helps the team keep building these with the fire and precision you guys love. Over 90% of listeners aren't subscribed, and honestly, that support makes a difference. Thanks for being here. Now back to it. Because they thought I'd just let this go. They were wrong. The guard at the bank didn't even look up when I walked in, just buzzed me through like I was another suit checking in on some grandmother's pearls or a bottle of scotch stashed for sentimental reasons. I'd made this trip before, but never opened the box. Never needed to. Until now. Box number 2247. Mid-tier. Small enough to ignore, important enough not to lose. I signed the access card, nodded to the woman behind the counter, and followed her into the vault. The door sealed behind us with a hiss that reminded me of a pressure chamber. Or a confession booth. I pulled out the slim steel container, placed it on the table, and flipped the latch. Inside was a single red folder, the cheap kind you'd find in a supply closet. It looked unremarkable. No one would have guessed it contained the quiet ending of an empire built on family arrogance and assumption. I opened it slowly. There it was, still crisp after all these years. The contract. Dated. Notarized. Sealed with signatures from people who barely read past the second page. It was my wife's father who had insisted on handling the paperwork himself back then. "We don't need to involve outside counsel," he had said, puffing his chest like he was doing me a favor. "You're family now." Family. That word was their favorite hammer. Used it to guilt me into favors, investments, sacrifices. They loved using it, until they forgot who actually wrote the checks. Back then, their small real estate venture was bleeding out. Her father had made too many over-leveraged bets trying to impress clients at country clubs. It was a vanity project built on legacy talk and borrowed credit. When the final bank walked away, he came to me, hat in hand, red-faced, humble, and I had helped. I paid off the $420,000 balloon loan, restructured it under a new holding entity I personally established, quietly. In exchange, he signed over an operating interest in the company's core property, a downtown multi-use commercial space they proudly called the family jewel. The clause was buried beneath legal language, like a mine waiting for the wrong step. It triggered a full asset transfer to the beneficiary, me, if he defaulted on a related performance note, which he did, 8 years ago, quietly. No big announcement, no dramatic fallout, just a missed quarterly payment he never even mentioned. Probably thought I didn't notice, or that I wouldn't act, and I hadn't. Not then, because I didn't want the building. I wanted the leverage. And now, 12 years into this marriage-turned-performance art piece, it was time to use it. I flipped to the page with the clause. Section 8.3c, handwritten initials beside it. Mine. His. Witnessed by Alan, my friend, and the only attorney I've ever truly trusted. A man who drafted this knowing full well how families like hers work. Nice on the surface, rotted underneath. He warned me even then. "You're going to want an exit. Might as well get paid on the way out." I'd forgotten how blunt he was. He was right, of course. I sat there at the vault table, holding the weight of 12 years in a single document. Not a scream, not a threat, just cold, clean logic. A signature, a clause, a reckoning. It's funny how quiet power feels. Not like winning the lottery or getting a promotion. No applause, no fanfare. Just the subtle shift of knowing you've been playing chess on a board they thought was checkers. They never asked for the paperwork back. Not once. Not even when the business recovered. Not even when they hosted a ribbon-cutting ceremony in front of the building with a plaque that read, "A family legacy continues." I took a photo of that plaque once. Not out of pride, insurance. A reminder of how deep their delusion ran. They forgot I owned the floor beneath their feet. I closed the folder. Placed it back inside the box. I didn't need to take it with me. Alan already had the digital copies filed and time-stamped. But holding the original, there was a kind of poetry in it. Like finding an old photo of someone who betrayed you before they ever got the chance. I sealed the box and stood up, nodding once to the clerk on my way out. No ceremony, no speech, just a quiet walk into the night, as a storm began to build, one they didn't see coming. But they would. Very, very soon. 12 years ago, I walked into their crisis like a man stepping onto a sinking ship with a bucket in one hand and a blindfold over his eyes. That's what they thought, anyway. They called it a family emergency, but let's not sugarcoat it. It was financial arson wrapped in legacy talk and trust me handshakes. Her father had run their little real estate venture like a frat house with a checking account. Over-leveraged properties, rent roll manipulation, vendor contracts written on napkins, all dressed up in mahogany furniture and the illusion of sophistication. And yet, they still looked down on me. I was the outsider, the numbers guy, the guy who wore off-brand polos and knew what amortization meant without needing Google. So when their lender called the note and the walls started to crack, they came to me, not out of respect, but desperation. I remember the meeting in their kitchen. Her father sat with a thick binder he clearly hadn't opened since the Bush administration. Her mother made coffee like this was just another casual brunch. Marlene stood behind them, arms crossed, eyes pleading but rehearsed. "We just need a short-term bridge loan," her father said, like he was asking me to water the plants. It wasn't short, and it sure as hell wasn't small. I nodded, pretending to be the doe-eyed son-in-law who wanted to help. But I was already doing the math in my head. The debt was ugly. Their reputation was worse. And their building, the family flagship, was the only thing of real value left. So I offered the loan. Personally. No bank. No middleman. Just me. I drafted the agreement with Alan. We buried the clause so deep under legalese you'd need a flashlight and a bar exam to find it. But it was there. Section 11.5. B. Upon default of the performance note and expiration of the 36-month grace period, full operational control and revenue rights revert to the silent investor listed on Schedule C. Schedule C was a single page. It had one name. Mine. They all signed it. Her father didn't even blink. Too eager to grab the check. Marlene kissed me that night like I'd just saved a baby from a burning building. Her mother even toasted me, called me a real asset to this family. Gratitude. That rare, fleeting lie people tell themselves when they're out of options. But here's the thing. Gratitude has a shelf life. Entitlement doesn't. 3 years later, the business stabilized. Rent checks rolled in again. They repainted the offices, replaced the rugs. Her father bragged to anyone who'd listened that he turned it all around. Not a single mention of me, of the money, of the clause. It was like I never existed in that equation. I wasn't the savior. I was the sucker. At least in their eyes. They kept calling it the family business, even though it had my name hidden under the hood like a kill switch waiting to flip. And you know what? I let them. I let them rebuild their pride on my silence. I let them forget. Because I didn't need their gratitude. I needed their confidence. Their assumption that the boring husband, the quiet husband, the predictable husband, would never rock the boat. That was the real investment, not in the business, but in their blind spots. People underestimate consistency. They mistake patience for passivity. They think the man who always refills the coffee pot is incapable of lighting the stove on fire. But all that time, while they made jokes about my boring job and my modest salary, I was watching how they operated, watching how they celebrated without me, watching how they walked right past the fact that the entire building, the one generating their cash flow, was operating under a silent clause tied to a man they barely acknowledged anymore. They thought they owned it. They thought I gave them that loan because I loved them. No, I gave it to them because I loved leverage. And leverage, unlike love, doesn't fade. It accrues interest. Quietly. Constantly. Until one day, it stands up and reminds everyone who actually held the cards. They had 12 years to read the fine print. They never did. I made the call from my truck. Not the office. Not home. Not even from the hotel room I'd quietly booked that night. Just in case the emotional theatrics escalated into broken plates and cries of, "How could you?" Which, to my surprise, never came. They were too busy clinking wine glasses over my supposed maturity and plotting how fast they could cut me out without legal friction. So I drove, pulled over into a dark corner of an empty parking lot behind a strip mall, engine idling, radio off. Just the dull hum of my thoughts and the soft glow of the phone screen in my hand. Alan answered on the second ring. "Hey," he said. "Calm. Always calm. You sitting down?" I asked. "I'm at the office." "So yes. What's up?" I took a breath. Not out of nerves, just to mark the moment. "It's time." There was a long pause. I imagined him turning his chair slightly, putting down his pen, rubbing his temple like he always did when the stakes were real. "You're sure?" he said. "Very." Another beat. Then, a low chuckle. Not mocking. Just the sound of someone who saw the pieces finally clicking into place. "Okay. I'll pull the file tonight. You want to be copied on the notice, or you want them to choke on it cold?" "Cold. Got it. I'll need 2 hours." We didn't talk about feelings. That's not Alan's thing. But he knew. Knew what this meant. Knew how long I'd carried this chess piece without moving it. Most guys don't even remember their own anniversary. I remembered the date on the clause like it was tattooed inside my eyelids. I hung up, dropped the phone on the passenger seat, and just stared through the windshield for a while. One of those moments where the air feels heavier, not bad, just thick with gravity. Not guilt, not pride, just clarity. The transition clause wasn't flashy. It didn't trigger sirens or locks on the door. It was subtle, almost boring in its structure. The contract was written with surgical precision. Once invoked, the operating control and associated revenue streams of the building would revert to me within a 72-hour period unless contested, which, given the lack of updated documentation, was legally impossible. It also initiated a temporary freeze on outgoing payments from business accounts tied to the operating entity. Standard procedure. Prevent fraud. Confirm identity. Nothing personal, just process. Alan was good at making big moves look like routine paperwork, like a bomb hidden inside a tax form. At 11:43 p.m., I received a short text. "Alan, notice is drafted. Submitting to the clerk at 12:01 a.m. We're live." That was it. No fireworks. No confetti. Just a cold hand slowly pulling the lever on a 12-year fuse. At 12:01 a.m. exactly, the documents were submitted electronically to the county clerk's office, time-stamped and sealed. By 7 a.m., notices would be generated for the bank, the management company, and the tenant accounts that paid rent into the trust. All of them would wake up to polite, confusing emails about change of authority, updated beneficiary, and temporary system access suspension during verification. Corporate speak for, "You're no longer in charge." They wouldn't understand it right away. People like that never do. They'd assume it was a clerical error, a glitch, a delay. Maybe even someone hacked the system. But the deeper they dig, the colder it would get. It wasn't a mistake. It was an execution. The clause had waited patiently for over a decade, like a steel bear trap hidden beneath a welcome mat. I didn't sleep that night, not because I was restless, but because I didn't want to miss a single moment. I watched the clock tick past midnight. I thought about the moment her father would open that email, the moment Marlene would glance at her phone and see her name missing from the monthly reports, the moment their family lawyer would sit there, flipping through the original agreement, face going pale. They trusted the quiet man to stay quiet. They built their confidence on my silence. And now, my silence was the hammer. 11:57 p.m. I was sitting on the edge of a motel bed, watching the seconds bleed off the cheap plastic clock bolted to the wall, like I was counting down to a lunar landing. Outside, the world was still. The parking lot below buzzed under a dying halogen light. No cars moved. The occasional flicker of a TV in another room reminded me I wasn't the only one awake, but I might have been the only one waiting. Alan had confirmed it twice. Documents queued. Clerk's server pinged. Filings uploaded to the state business registry under encrypted authorization keys. All timed for automatic delivery. Exactly midnight. Not a second before. Not a second late. It was oddly ceremonial. Not loud. Not explosive. Just final. At 12 o'clock and 43 seconds a.m., I received a screenshot from Alan. Confirmation email from the clerk's office. My name. Effective control date. Today. Filed under Article 3 of the Property Holding Agreement. Clause 11.5b. Triggered and verified. Another text followed, with his signature deadpan. Alan, welcome to ownership. Sleep well. I didn't reply. Instead, I stood and walked over to the small kitchenette. Poured myself the last half glass of store-brand whiskey I'd brought with me. No toast. Just a long, slow sip. I wasn't celebrating. I was acknowledging. Because this wasn't revenge, not really. This was physics. Actions and consequences. They pushed. I pulled. And now, the balance had shifted. At 12:07 a.m., the bank lock initiated. Automated protocol. A soft pause. Really, just a compliance hold on outbound transactions until new beneficiary credentials were verified. It wouldn't alarm anyone immediately. But when payroll bounced or the rent checks hit a wall, someone would notice. The payment portal would flag logins from anyone on the old access list as unauthorized. The company account? Frozen. Vendor contracts? Auto-flagged. The digital vault that housed every lease, every maintenance invoice, every tenant email, locked. All pending approval from the newly recognized authority. Me. The overnight team at the tenant support center wouldn't realize anything until someone tried to issue a work order. Then they'd be prompted to update the approval routing. A single name listed. Mine. And still, they were asleep. Marlene would be curled up in the condo I had mostly paid for, likely dreaming about how she'd spin this new narrative. Her mother, probably imagining brunch reservations and the next family photo without me in it. Her father? The man who used to give me forced advice about how real men don't make waves. He was snoring in his lake house, blissfully unaware that by morning, his financial world would require his daughter's boring ex-husband's signature just to get the air conditioning fixed. It was beautifully still. That's the thing about leverage. It rarely announces itself. It waits. It grows teeth in the dark. And when it bites, it's not rage, it's structure. Legality. Math. All night, the system would do its work. Emails would generate. Documents would route. Verification codes would queue up for inboxes tied to names no longer in power. It wasn't personal. Not on paper. But it felt damn personal. I checked my watch one last time. 12:39 a.m. I could have called it a night. Could have turned off the lamp and let the silence carry me into sleep. But instead, I opened my laptop. Logged into the back-end portal for the property management firm, the one her family had hired years ago when they thought they were growing. They never revoked my credentials. Why would they? I was just the guy who helped out in the early days. I scrolled down to the tenant list. Retail leases. Office spaces. Maintenance logs. Security contracts. All operational control. Pending me. There, under financial authority. My name had already auto-filled. System triggered. Nothing manual. Just the cold, clean language of protocol doing what it was designed to do. I clicked out, sat back, and smiled. Not a cruel smile. Just the quiet one that comes when a long game ends not with applause, but with confirmation. The game was never to hurt them. The game was to remind them. They thought I was a placeholder, a financial stepping stone, a quiet man with no appetite for control. But control was never about shouting. It was about knowing the difference between noise and timing. And my timing had just gone live. 6:42 a.m. Her father wasn't a morning man, not unless there was a tea time or a contractor he wanted to intimidate before coffee. But the shrill ping from his phone dragged him up anyway, groggy, barefoot, wrapped in a robe too expensive for someone 3 mortgages deep. He squinted at the screen. A push notification from the bank's app. Access suspended. Your login credentials have been temporarily disabled due to account authority change. At first, he assumed it was a glitch. Maybe the Wi-Fi cut out. Maybe Donna, his assistant, changed something without telling him again. She had a bad habit of fixing things that weren't broken. He tried again. Entered his password. Access denied. Again. Slower this time. Double-check the credentials. Access denied. Then the real red flag. The option to reset his password was grayed out. His name wasn't even recognized as a primary contact. He sat up straighter, suddenly awake. The robe now felt thinner. The air colder. He shuffled to the kitchen, phone pressed to his ear. Donna picked up on the second ring. Hey, it's me, he barked. Can you log into the tenant portal? Something's wrong with the damn bank. Silence. Then, I was about to call you. That was never a good sentence. Why? I just got 3 emails. The landscaper, the elevator inspection team, and the cleaning vendor, all requesting confirmation of contract freezes. One of them said the payment bounced. He pinched the bridge of his nose. Payment bounced. What are you talking about? I approved that yesterday. Donna hesitated. Sir, your name isn't showing as authorized anymore. The portal says there's a transition pending verification. It has a new name listed for operating authority. He froze. What name? Another pause. Then she said it. Quietly. Almost like she didn't believe it herself. Evan Markel. Me. The name echoed through his kitchen like a gunshot in a church. Check the legal notice queue, he snapped. There's got to be a mistake. This has to be a breach. But she was already a step ahead. There's a letter from the county clerk time-stamped last night. Midnight exactly. A change of operational control for the Markel Property Holdings Trust. He dropped into a chair. No, he muttered. That trust was just for the financing. It's passive. It was dormant. Not anymore, she replied. Sir, he activated the clause. That's when he understood. Not fully. Not yet. But the shape of the iceberg had revealed itself. Because the Markel Property Holdings Trust wasn't some back-pocket formality. It was the contract. The paper skeleton they'd buried under assumptions and dinners and years of pretending I was just a helpful son-in-law. And now? Now it was awake. He didn't say anything for a few seconds. Just stared out the window, watching the sprinklers fire up on his perfect, rented lawn. Then, as if gravity itself had changed, he stood up and moved like he had purpose. Threw on pants. Grabbed keys. Didn't even check the mirror. He wasn't shaving for this. He wasn't preparing. He was reacting. Because the one thing he'd always feared, more than losing the money, was losing control. And right now, he couldn't even approve a $200 plumbing invoice without my signature. He dialed Marlene next. No answer. She was probably still asleep, blissfully unaware that her father's phone was filling with notices that all began with the same line. This is not a drill. The vendors would start pulling contracts. The tenants would start asking questions. The building they'd built their egos around would, by mid-morning, become a fortress they couldn't enter. All of it legal. All of it sealed. All of it mine. He didn't know how deep the iceberg ran. Not yet. But he was already taking on water. He didn't knock. Didn't ring the bell. Didn't even shut the car door all the way. The engine still humming in the driveway like it knew he wouldn't be staying long. The moment her father barreled through the front door of Marlene's townhome, I imagined the sound echoed like a shotgun blast through her Pinterest-perfect entryway. Do you have any idea what he just did? He bellowed, holding up his phone like it was a warrant. Marlene, my soon-to-be ex-wife, the one who declared she was done with all this just 12 hours prior, was still in an oversized hoodie, barefoot, nursing a mug of coffee she probably hadn't tasted yet. She looked up from her kitchen island like a teenager caught skipping class. What are you talking about? She said, blinking. He marched straight to her, hand trembling from rage or panic, probably both, and shoved the screen in her face. Look at this, he snapped. She took the phone, brows knitting together as her eyes scanned the document. Her lips moved, reading silently. Then again, slower. Beneficiary of operating authority, Evan Markel. That was the moment her posture changed. She stopped blinking. Her shoulders pulled in like she'd just been slapped by the air itself. Her mouth opened, then closed again. A faint stutter of disbelief flickered across her face. "Wait," she whispered. This is fake. This has to be fake. It's from the county clerk, Marlene," her father growled. "Do you think I typed this up in the car?" She kept staring at the screen, scrolling through the dry legal language as if a missing comma would reverse it all. When she reached the page with the trust filing ID, her hand started to tremble. I thought that loan was." "Yeah, so did I," he cut in. "We both thought that loan was just a favor. Turns out it was a leash. And we just ran out of slack." She set the phone down like it burned her. No, this doesn't make sense. Evan wouldn't do this. He's not like that." He laughed. The kind of laugh that doesn't sound amused, just hollow. "That's what I said last night." They stood in silence for a second, just long enough for her to feel the weight of every assumption collapsing around her. The man she'd smugly dismissed 12 hours ago, the man she described as dull to her sister, within earshot, like I was some dusty lamp she was finally discarding, had just locked down their entire family operation without lifting his voice or raising a hand. She picked the phone back up and reread the name again. "My name." Her voice cracked. But he didn't say anything. Last night he just smiled. He didn't even. Because he didn't need to, her father snapped. He didn't have to scream, Marlene. He had the paperwork. She turned, wobbling slightly like someone standing on ground that suddenly wasn't there. "But we never updated the documents. He never even asked for them back." Exactly. The realization hit her mid-sentence. She gripped the counter for balance. That's the moment, right there, when the arrogance turned to panic. When the entitled certainty of being in control cracked open and spilled out into the tile. She wasn't worried about the money yet. Not yet. She was just beginning to understand how deep the hole was. How long I'd been quietly digging while she laughed at my boring spreadsheets and rolled her eyes at my late nights. She didn't cry. Not yet. But her hand shook as she set the phone down again, eyes glazed, mouth slightly parted. "Why didn't he say anything?" she whispered. Her father didn't answer. Because there was nothing left to say. The trap had already closed. They just hadn't realized they were the ones who'd built it for me. They held the meeting in the same living room where they'd once toasted my birthday with plastic flutes and gluten-free cake, like it was some kind of charity event. Same room where Marlene's sister once joked I was married into this family like a printer into an office. Useful, until you jam. They all laughed. I didn't. Now, no one was laughing. The energy in the room was electric in the worst way, static, tense, brittle. Her father paced in tight loops, sweating through his golf polo. Her mother sat stiffly on the edge of the couch like a senator awaiting indictment. Greg, the brother-in-law, had his head tilted like he was listening to a podcast no one else could hear. Even Donna, the assistant, was there, called in because she knows the back end. And Marlene? She was silent, hair pulled into a tight bun that still managed to look accidental. Her eyes didn't move from the coffee table where the document sat. My document. The one with her father's signature. The one with mine printed beneath the clause that now owned their lives. Their attorney arrived late. A mid-level estate specialist they'd known since the school auction days, named Roland. Tin suit, nervous hands, breath like old almonds. He wasn't prepared for this. None of them were. He sat down, opened the file, and started reading aloud. Section 11.5. B. In the event of payment default beyond the grace period, all rights to operational control and associated revenue shall revert to the silent investor listed in Schedule C. He looked up. Schedule C lists Evan Markel. They all turned to Marlene, as if she'd say no. It must be another Evan Markel. Common name. But she said nothing. Roland cleared his throat. Continued reading. The clause was airtight. Not only did I own the operating rights, but any attempt to challenge the clause would first require full repayment of the original loan, adjusted for inflation and interest. And not just the principal. Every penny tied to the business through the trust. 7 figures. Conservatively. Her father leaned forward. So what's the play? We pay him back. He releases control. Roland hesitated. That's not in the contract. The release is at his discretion. Legally, he doesn't have to sell. Doesn't have to release. You transferred it. He invoked it. It's done. But what if we sue? Greg blurted. Then you'll lose, Roland said bluntly. and pay court fees. Her mother stood suddenly, walked to the window, arms folded so tightly across her chest they looked fused. He was family. He was supposed to help us. Roland raised an eyebrow. He did. That shut everyone up. They started grasping at options. Maybe refinance. Maybe convince me to renegotiate. Maybe find a buyer and present an offer too big to ignore. Then Marlene spoke for the first time that morning. He won't sell. They all turned. She stared down at the clause again. He doesn't need the money. He doesn't want the building. He wants us out of it. Her voice was flat, not angry, just hollow. Her father looked at her like she'd just started speaking Swahili. That doesn't make sense. Why would he? Because we treated him like wallpaper for 12 years. Silence. Marlene didn't cry. She didn't flinch. Just traced her finger along the page like she was trying to rewrite it with skin alone. Roland finally closed the folder. Well, he said, standing slowly. Unless you have $700,000 liquid by Friday, or unless he miraculously changes his mind, this meeting is over. They sat there for a few more minutes, hoping the silence would give birth to a miracle. It didn't. There was no legal backdoor, no technicality, no cousin at the clerk's office who could make this disappear. They had built the building, decorated the offices, hung the family portraits, but they hadn't read the paperwork. Now I owned the floor beneath their legacy, and the silence that followed was the sound of them finally understanding they were just tenants on land that no longer wanted them. It was raining, the soft, apologetic kind of rain that tries to feel cinematic, but in reality just soaks your socks and makes the world smell like wet asphalt and regret. I just sat down with a coffee, black, no sugar, no cream, when I heard the knock. Not a pounding, not a desperate hammering, just 3 soft taps. I knew before I opened the door. Marlene stood there, hair pulled back too neatly, mascara smudged just enough to look unplanned. She was holding a folder, cheap manila, already damp at the corners, and wearing the coat I bought her 2 Christmases ago. I recognized the purse, too. The one she claimed was a little too much when I surprised her with it. She wore it now like armor. I thought I'd find you here, she said quietly, almost like we were old friends meeting under difficult circumstances. I said nothing, just stepped aside and let her in. The place was modest, quiet, sparse. A long-term rental I kept for travel days, but really just used when I needed distance. She looked around like she was searching for signs of life. Photos, another woman's jacket, maybe something to punch. But the place was sterile. She wasn't going to find any ghosts here. She sat down. Uninvited, of course. I want to talk, she said. I waited. She shifted in the chair, suddenly aware that this wasn't going to be her usual performance. No crowd, no allies, no family, no familiar walls to lean against. Just me, and the very real silence between us. I was thinking, she said, that maybe we rushed into things. Maybe this doesn't have to be the end. Oh, there it was. The opening bid. Maybe we let things go too far, she added, carefully. You and I, we built a lot together. I smiled. Not warmly, not cruelly either. Just enough to show I'd hurt her. Just enough to say, you still think this is about you. This isn't about us anymore, I said softly. She blinked. Like the words didn't compute. Like I'd just spoken in code. I know you're hurt, she said, switching tactics. But we can fix this. If you could just undo the filing, maybe sit down with my father and... No. She paused. No, she repeated. I stood up, walked over to the side table, picked up a single sheet of paper I'd printed 2 days ago, walked it over, placed it gently in front of her. She looked down. Read the heading. Offer of transfer, voluntary buyout agreement. Below it, just one line. Buyout price, $0. And below that, conditions, immediate, permanent severance of all personal and professional contact. Her eyes scanned it again, slowly this time, as if somewhere in the space between the letters she might find an asterisk. A loophole. A wink. But there wasn't one. She looked up at me. Why are you doing this? I tilted my head. You asked me what I wanted 12 years ago. You never listened to the answer. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. The same way people do when they realize they've stepped onto a stage, but the script they rehearsed isn't the one being used. I'm giving you the building, I said gently. Free and clear. You can keep the name, the legacy, the walls. All of it. But you'll never see me again. You'll never contact me. You'll never say my name in a room I might be in. You'll never use me as a cautionary tale or a punchline. Silence. I handed her a pen. She didn't take it. Not yet. I didn't think you'd hate me enough to walk away like this, she whispered. I shrugged. I don't hate you, Marlene. I just finally believe you. She stared at me like she wanted to cry, like she wanted me to stop her, like some piece of her thought I'd break. That maybe, just maybe, the old version of me would come crawling back if she blinked slow enough or tilted her head just right. Instead, I walked to the door, opened it, waited. She picked up the paper, didn't sign it, didn't tear it, just held it like a verdict she hadn't prepared for. Then she walked out, still holding it. No words, no goodbye, no victory, just the weight of a final chance, offered, then removed. And that folder she brought? She left it on the table, empty. The ocean doesn't care about family drama. It just keeps coming. Waves against the shore, same rhythm every day, constant, deliberate, unapologetic. I sit here most mornings with a cup of coffee that's too strong, too bitter, and exactly how I like it now. No one tells me otherwise anymore. The patio overlooks a small cove along the Carolina coast, a place I found years ago during a work retreat I never mentioned to anyone. It was quiet, unpretentious, and just far enough off the grid to not attract the vacation home crowd. I paid cash. Technically, the wire came from an LLC tied to the property trust's residual profits, which is a fancy way of saying the money came from the building, the one her family used to call the legacy. I've been here 3 weeks. The business? Still running. Efficient, even. I transferred management to a third-party operations firm. No more family. No more nepotism. No more Donna, though I heard she landed at a rival company within days. Smart woman. Just backed the wrong team. Tenant turnover stabilized. Rent collections resumed. Vendors reinstated their contracts once the dust settled, and the paperwork made it clear the old regime was out. Permanently. No appeals. No last-minute miracles. Her family? Last I heard, they sold the lake house. The family home went next. Quiet listing, cash buyer, one of those quick-turn real estate investment groups that slaps a new paint job on bad memories and calls it market ready. I didn't gloat. Didn't show up. Didn't even drive by. That part of me, the one that needed to be seen. He died the night I realized silence hits harder when you've already won. Marlene? She hasn't called. Not that she could. The number she had no longer exists, and even if she tracked me down, the buyout agreement sits in a folder in my safe. Her signature's still fresh. Her eyes in that moment, empty. Not with sadness, not even with anger. Just recognition. She saw the man she thought was dull, polite, manageable, and realized she'd spent over a decade underestimating the one person who never needed applause to win. Her father's voice still floats through my head sometimes. Not out of guilt, just clarity. That morning, storming into her house, waving the filing notice, face redder than the wine he never stopped drinking, he'd shouted, "Do you realize what he just did?" It echoed down their halls. It broke through the denial. It triggered the collapse. And in that moment, when Marlene looked down at my name in black print, next to the words beneficiary of operating authority, she finally understood. This hadn't just happened. This had been waiting. Because I'd realized something, too. Right when she looked me in the eyes over her parents' dinner table and said, "I'm done." That wasn't a declaration. It was permission to stop holding the line, to stop protecting people who only valued my silence, to reclaim what I'd built, not for them, but because of them. Now I sit alone. No noise, no panic, no performances, just me. A man they dismissed, a man they tried to erase from the picture, a man who, when all the noise fell away, still owned the frame.